This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
So let's recite the Heart Sutra together. The Bodhisattva of compassion, when he meditated deeply, saw the emptiness of all five skandhas and sundered the bonds that caused him suffering. Here then, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness no other than form. Form is only emptiness, emptiness only form. Feeling, thought and choice, consciousness itself, are the same as this. All things are by nature void. They are not born or destroyed, nor are they stained or pure, nor do they wax or wane. So, in emptiness, no form, no feeling, thought or choice, nor is there consciousness. No eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. No colour, sound, smell, taste, touch, or what the mind takes hold of, nor even act of sensing. No ignorance or end of it, nor all that comes of ignorance. No withering, no death, no end of them. Nor is there pain or cause of pain, or cease in pain, or noble path to lead from pain. Not even wisdom to attain. Attainment too is emptiness. So know that the Bodhisattva, holding to nothing whatever, but dwelling in prajna wisdom, is freed of delusive hindrance, rid of the fear bred by it, and reaches clearest nirvana. All Buddhas of past and present, Buddhas of future time, using this prajna wisdom, come to full and perfect vision. Hear then the great Dharani, the radiant, peerless mantra, the prajna paramita, whose words allay all pain. Hear and believe its truth. Gate, gate, paragate, arasamgate, bodhiswaha. Gate, gate, paragate, arasamgate, bodhiswaha. Gate, gate, paragate, arasamgate, bodhiswaha. It must have been several years ago now that Maitri Siddhi asked me for an idea for a Sangha weekend retreat, a Four Sanghas retreat, and I just plucked the Heart Sutra out of the air. I thought, let's do that, and I've kind of been regretting it ever since. The reason being that it's a text, as you can probably tell, that is, in a way, it's talking to us from the end of the path. This is, as it were, someone who's reached the end of the path looking back over the path, and this is their perspective. And it's not the perspective, probably, that we are inhabiting. So the task today is to try to find ways of making it both understandable and relevant to where we're at. And I'll see what I can do. So first of all, the title. The Heart Sutra is a condensation of its full title, which is the sutra, the teaching on the perfection of wisdom, the Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra. So it's the sutra on the heart of the perfection of wisdom. So heart here is not so much about, it's not all touchy-feely, as you might have gathered. It's the heart as in the sense of the essence of the perfection of wisdom. The essence of the perfection of wisdom. Prajna paramita, prajna wisdom, paramita perfection. So prajna paramita is a word that will maybe start sounding familiar if it doesn't already, because I'll probably say it quite a bit. The language is Sanskrit. Okay. Yeah. So the language is Sanskrit. The language that it was probably maybe written in was Sanskrit. Some people say Chinese. We won't worry about that. It was, and I won't say very much about the historical context. That's a whole different talk. But it's probably composed somewhere between about 100 and 400 Common Era after Christ. So in other words, it's quite a while after the time of the Buddha. And it belongs to a whole series of teachings which arose round about from the time of Christ onwards, known as the Mahayana, the great vehicle. So this was a development that came after what we might call early Buddhism. Early Buddhism, about the first 500 years of Buddhism. And then there emerged another set of teachings which had slightly different emphases, partly in response to where things had ended up with early Buddhism. Mahayana was particularly interested in two things united, if you like: wisdom and compassion. It's very keen on wisdom, and it's very keen on compassion, and it's very keen on bringing those two things together into an experience called the bodhicitta, the heart of awakening. So prajna is this word that we'll keep coming back to, prajna, wisdom. And it's a kind of particular form of Buddhist spiritual wisdom, which we'll explore. In Pali, it's panya. Some people might know it's panya. That's all I'll say about the historical context. There's a whole great thing that could be said there. Our context in Triratna, we're most likely to come across the Heart Sutra in the Sevenfold Puja. Can I have a quick sense of how many people have not done a Sevenfold Puja? Yep, one. Okay. Are we doing one tonight, Mantra City? Or we are. Okay. That will be remedied very shortly. So the Sevenfold Puja is a traditional Mahayana practice to cultivate the bodhicitta, the heart of awakening. And there's 7 stages. The 7th stage is called entreaty and supplication, where we ask the Buddhas for a teaching. Our particular form of the Sevenfold Puja was compiled by Sangharakshita from a traditional text. And what Sangharakshita did after the 6th stage, after entreaty and supplication, he inserted a teaching. He inserted the Heart Sutra. So it's as if we ask the Buddhas for a teaching, and this is what we get. We get the Heart Sutra. So Sangharakshita didn't choose to put in the Four Noble Truths, or the Eightfold Path, or the 3 Lakshanas, or any other nice, straightforward early Buddhist teaching. He put in the Heart Sutra. Because the Heart Sutra, as it were, represents the ultimate teaching in a very pithy form. The ultimate teaching in a very, very pithy form. It's the heart of perfect wisdom. So that's why he dropped it in there. And I think it's for that reason that it's good for us to get to know it. If no other reason, it keeps cropping up whenever we do a puja, so we may as well get to know it to some extent. If you want to hear what Sangharakshita has to say about the Heart Sutra, there's a talk on Free Buddhist Audio called the Heart Sutra. It also appears in this book, Wisdom Beyond Words. I won't try and recap what he said. I mean, some of his stuff will find its way into this talk. Mostly it won't. And I think the way we'll do this, we'll go through it verse by verse. I won't give like a full commentary, but at least we'll go through the verses, I said, a little bit, and then I'll have more to say about halfway through. So Matt has kindly agreed to read out the verses for us. So Matt, if you'll give us verse 1, please.
Bodhisattva of compassion, when he meditated deeply, saw the emptiness of all 5 skandhas and sundered the bonds that caused him suffering.
Thank you. So you start out right away with the Bodhisattva of compassion. And it was just this morning that Vidyamani was talking about seeing through the eyes of compassion. And I think this is really important, that we are approaching this truth teaching, this high truth teaching, through the eyes of compassion. We are essentially hearing it from the Bodhisattva of compassion, from Avalokiteshvara. So that's pretty much all the explicit compassion we get in this teaching. But it's good to remember that this is, as it were, coming from the Bodhisattva of compassion. In other translations, it is Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, actually speaking. So he's the one giving the teaching. So he's meditating deeply, and he sees the emptiness of all 5 skandhas, and that does the job. It's that sunders the bonds that caused him suffering. So it is this insight into emptiness that is what frees him and is what will free us. So this teaching is all about emptiness. It's all about emptiness. So we're just going to dive in to what emptiness is. I'll come back to the 5 skandhas in a second. So this meditation that he enters into is completely open. It is an open meditation. It is not structured. He's not reflecting. Sinking into emptiness is entering into a state of complete openness. Maitri Siddhi was talking about this yesterday. It's a state of complete non-conceptuality. We'll come back to this. So let's see what he has to say about emptiness. Can you give us verse 2, Matt?
Here then, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness no other than form. Form is only emptiness, emptiness only form.
Thank you. Can I just look at your translation? Oh, sorry. Can I look at your yellow translation? Very good, okay. So your yellow translation has it right. Here then is not here as in listen. Here is here. Here as in this state of completely open, non-conceptual meditation. This is what you see. My translation has here as in listen, so that's wrong. So, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness no other than form. Probably the most famous resonant line from the Heart Sutra, about which I'll say almost nothing, because that's another talk. So I'll say a little bit, but not very much. Can you give us verse 3?
Feeling, thought and choice, consciousness itself are the same as this.
Right. So what we have here are the 5 skandhas. Form, feeling, thought, choice, consciousness. Not our usual translations, actually, but we'll run with these. So these are the Buddha's way of slicing and dicing a human organism. So he divides us up into form, our sort of physical corporeality, and then these other mental factors that here are listed as feeling, thought, choice, consciousness. This is a very, very traditional early Buddhist list. You'll come across it loads if you read any of the early teachings. And I'm not going to say very much about them. In fact, I gave 2 talks at Shrewsbury if you want to hear about them. Again, it's just another whole, not exactly can of worms, but it's a big teaching. This is the Buddha's way of looking in detail at our experience of ourself and investigating it. And he says that they are no other than emptiness. So, okay, we have to start looking at this word emptiness. When you hear the word emptiness, what you have to do is place a little question mark after it, saying, empty of what? Empty of what? I kind of wish the Buddhist tradition had never settled on a noun, emptiness. I wish it had just stuck with the adjective empty. Shunya means empty. Shunyata means emptiness. So what are the 5 skandhas empty of? So at this point, what we're talking about is the way that the 5 skandhas, in other words, our whole psychophysical being, is empty of any fixed self-nature. So any thing, any way that we conceive of ourself as in some way behind or owning our experience. So this is the traditional way that we tend to think of ourselves, that here I am, human being, having all these experiences, getting older, getting ill, having emotions and things, but somehow there's a kind of me at the back of it all that's having all those experiences. There's a me that's getting older. There's a sort of a constant self that is somehow independent of, behind all of these experiences. So I've recently returned from a 10-day long walk in Snowdonia, part of it with the Bayanara, and it was pretty intense. Pretty much every day was pretty intense in some way. Sometimes it was intensely joyful or intensely blissful at times. Sometimes it was intensely dismal. I was feeling intensely grim or fearful. And it was really quite revealing just how quickly I would cycle through different selves. I'd have a joyful self, and then I'd have a fearful self, and then I'd have a relieved self, and then I'd have a grim self. And these selves were cycling through, dependent on the weather, on the terrain, on my current temperature, on whether I just had a nice hot cup of tea or not. It's all these conditions were going on, and all these selves were coming about, depending on those conditions. And it was quite interesting to watch the way that there's still this feeling at the back of it all that this is, as it were, me being a happy self, this is me being a grim self, this is me being a fearful self. It's like I was still sort of conceiving of some owner of all these experiences that was not to be found. You know, when I look, that owner of this experience was not to be found. There's just all of these experiences, all of these emotions, all of these moods, coming and going, conditioned by weather, by food, by physical body, by whatever, by my good friend. All of these external influences conditioning the next arising self. So this is something we can look out for. We can look out for the way that we conceive of ourselves, as it were, separate from and apart from all the moods and all the experiences that we're having. So this is probably very familiar to you from the early Buddhist teaching of anatta, of insubstantiality, no fixed selfhood. So here we're still on the familiar terrain of early Buddhism. So Avalokiteshvara says that our psychophysical being, the 5 skandhas, are empty of any kind of fixed self-independent nature. We are porous. We are so porous and connected. So he says form is no other than emptiness, and by extension feeling is no other than emptiness, and thought is no other than emptiness. So all the 5 skandhas are no other than emptiness. But also emptiness is no other than form, no other than feeling, no other than choice, thought, and so on. So he's trying to do a little bit of a corrective here. He's saying it doesn't mean that there's nothing, because all of this stuff is manifesting. All of these things, all of these thoughts and all of these impulses and all this consciousness and this body, it's all manifesting. So you have this kind of relationship between appearance and emptiness. Okay, I think that's all I want to say about that. Let's move on to verse 4, please, Matt.
All things are by nature void. They are not born or destroyed, nor are they stained or pure, nor do they wax or wane.
All things are by nature void. In other words, all things are empty. And thing here is translating dharma. And dharma has this dual sense of teaching on one hand, but also thing isn't a bad translation. It's a really, really general word. It really means any experience we can have. It means any phenomenon, anything that appears to us. Sarvadharmaha shunyata lakshana. This is the Sanskrit, and this is a big statement. Sarvadharmaha, all dharmas, shunyata lakshana, are marked with emptiness. Right, so what am I going to say here? So dharma can mean experience, can mean any sight, any sound, any thought, any idea. And whatever it is that we experience is marked with emptiness. So in other words, it's not just ourselves that are empty. It's absolutely anything we can experience that is empty. And now you know to ask, but empty of what, Vajrapriya? What are all these things? What are all of these experiences empty of? They too are empty of any fixed, independent, substantial, real, ultimately real nature. There's nothing that we can pin down. This is what it's saying. You can experience it. It's all definitely being experienced. The Dharma doesn't deny anything that you are experiencing. The Dharma is only ever saying that an awful lot of what we're experiencing we're misinterpreting. So usually we tend to interpret dharmas, we tend to interpret experiences in a way that causes us suffering. So this is the crux of it. We cause ourselves suffering because we misinterpret our experience. And yesterday, Maitri Siddhi was talking about things, was glossing the Heart Sutras, talking about openness and unboundedness. The Heart Sutra is trying to tell us that all of our experience is open, unbounded, uncompartmentalized, not divided into bits. We're not divided from... There's no division in our experience. We cannot find any division in our experience, basically. We impose division, we impose concepts on our experience in order to understand it, but those interpretations belong to us, they don't belong to reality. So an image for this is the blue sky. I was hoping we might have a bit more of this today, so we can just sit and gaze at it. But the blue sky is an image of the true nature of things, as seen through its shunya aspect, as seen through its empty aspect. Completely unbounded, completely open. And when we become... Well, in the ordination process for people who ask for ordination and when we become ordained, we train in experiencing using the blue sky as an image of shunyata. So that's something to look forward to if you haven't already done it. So everything that we experience in itself is conditioned. Well, all samsaric experience is conditioned. In other words, it's dependent upon other things for its existence, for its supposed existence. And in particular, it's dependent on our interpretation of it for its existence as any kind of entity. it can't be isolated from its conditions. It can't be isolated from its causes. So everything is, as it were, unbounded. It can't be isolated in space, in time now, and it can't be isolated from all of the conditions that lead up to it. So there's this image of complete unbounded being, if you like. So why is this important? It is trying to inculcate a particular experience, this experience of openness. And the reason that is important is because it's that lets us release grasping. We only grasp onto things because we isolate them. We think of them as separate from ourselves, and then we want to own them or reject them. So if we can find a way to see through the way that we polarize with objects, then that releases the craving or aversion, and that releases the suffering. So if you remember your third noble truth, hopefully you've come across the four noble truths. The third noble truth, the cause of suffering is craving. So, sorry, that's the second noble truth. So the third noble truth, if you release craving, you're released from suffering. So this is the whole point. This is what the whole Heart Sutra is trying to get us to do, is trying to get us to release craving, so we release suffering. So let's just try and find a little application here. Let's just try and get practical for a moment. One way we can look at this is being realistic. Being realistic. Can we be realistic about our expectations of people around us, the objects that we thirst after, the situations that we put ourselves into? Can we be realistic about the holiday that we're planning for the summer? It's probably not going to be sunny the whole time. Probably going to have delays in the airport. You're probably going to get bitten by insects, all this kind of thing. Can you be realistic about the kind of experience that we're anticipating with craving, if we are? Can we be realistic about our friends, about our lovers, our partners, our spouses? You can always rely on your friends' weaknesses. You can always rely on people's patterns. So if you have the expectation that they're suddenly going to be super reliable, or they're suddenly going to start clearing up after themselves, or they're suddenly going to be whatever it is, that's not realistic. You can rely on people to follow the patterns that they have, and then let them surprise you. Can you be realistic about any material object that you're thirsting after? Having done my walking trip, I'm now in outdoor kit mode. It's like, sorry, what's that?
We noted.
That's right. So can I be realistic about this puffy jacket that I want, or this new set of boots that I want? Okay, that's all I want to say about Sarvadharma Shunyata Lakshana. That's not really the Heart Sutra's main message. Avalokiteshvara just sort of skims over that quickly. So, can we have verse, where are we? Verse 6, please, Matt.
No eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. No
I'm sorry, Matt, I meant verse 5, beg your pardon.
So in emptiness, no form, no feeling, thought or choice, nor is there consciousness.
So the skandhas are this early Buddhist list, and what Avalokiteshvara is saying is when you sink into an open, non-conceptual space, you don't find them. You don't find them. You just find openness. You don't find all these divisions. You don't actually experience ourselves as divided into a body and feelings and thoughts and choices and consciousness. You just have this open field of awareness. Our experience is empty of the skandhas. The skandhas are just a convenient conceptual tool to slice and dice our experience in a way that's helpful. It's helpful to take you out the other end into emptiness where they no longer serve their function. Okay, now can we do... Oh, sorry. 6. Yep.
No eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. No colour, sound, smell, taste, touch, or what the mind takes hold of, nor even act of sensing.
So here we have another good Buddhist list. This is a list of the 18 dhatus. So early Buddhism conceived of the perceptual process in terms of 6 senses, usual 5 physical senses plus mind. Each sense has a sense organ, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. It had sense objects, colour or form, sound, smell, taste, touch, or what the mind takes hold of. So in other words, ideas. So those are ideas are the sense objects for the mind. And it also conceived of 6 sense consciousnesses, which here is just being glossed as active sensing. So this is a slightly obscure way of conceiving of sensing, but the idea is that experiences were conceived as being this union, this coming together, this conditioned relationship between these, well, any particular sense between these 3 things. We have an eye coming into contact with an object's form, and there's eye consciousness. In other words, we're awake and we're attending to our sight. So anyway, there's a whole big teaching around that. The idea is to realise that even our act of sensing is an act of conditionality. This is conditions happening. And again, when we do that, when we see that from the perspective of completely open meditation, it ain't like that. That's just a convenient formula, a convenient conceptual tool to realise the conditioned nature of all of our experiencing. Let's carry on. Number 7.
No ignorance or envy, nor all that comes of ignorance, no withering, no death, no end of them.
Okay, who recognises that list? Any takers? Except for Machu City. Sorry? All right, yeah. Okay, tell us, Annie. No! Good try. You were put off by the first word, I know. Darren! The 12 Nidanas, thank you. This is a very abbreviated form of the 12 Nidanas. Some of you will know the 12 Nidanas start with ignorance and ends with old age, sickness and death. So he's saying there's no ignorance, so there's no first Nidana. There's no end of it, no withering, no death, and there's no end of them. So if you don't know the 12 Nidanas, don't worry. It's another Buddhist conceptual teaching that's designed to illustrate conditionality. And again, it's just a useful concept, It doesn't exist in reality. It's not fixed and final. Okay, now verse 8.
Nor is there pain or cause of pain, or cease in pain, or noble path to lead from pain.
Annie?
Yes, the four noble truths.
Yes, you're right. We're just ahead of the game. Okay, so the Buddha's just taken away, or Avalokiteshvara has just taken away the Four Noble Truths from us, including any kind of path. He's just cut away the whole path from under our feet there. So we might be getting worried at this point. So this is where I'm going to pause going through the text and just try and expand what's happening here. So Avalokiteshvara started out applying shunyata to phenomena, to dhammas, to ourselves and to the things that we see around us. Now he's applying it to Buddhism itself. He's applying shunyata to all the teachings that the Buddha gave. He's saying they are all shunya, they're all empty. Vajrapriya, empty of what? What are these teachings empty of? Okay, that's what we've got to answer, isn't it? Before I do that, I'll take a little step back to a talk I gave 2 months ago. You can find it on YouTube. Wrong view, right view, perfect vision. So there's this very useful distinction between right view and perfect vision. Sangharakshita made this distinction between right view and perfect vision. Right view you might recognise as one way of talking about the first stage of the Eightfold Path, as is perfect vision. Right view is a way of talking about all the Buddhist doctrines, all the Buddhist teachings, all the practices that we do, all those nice lists that we love memorising, any kind of thing that you can read on a piece of paper, anything that people can speak, that's right view. So this is the way that the Buddha tried to communicate his understanding. But what he was communicating wasn't a load of ideas, he was communicating a vision. He was communicating perfect vision. He was communicating a way of seeing and experiencing the world, which he quite explicitly said was beyond concepts, beyond reason. He said, you can't actually talk about what I'm experiencing. But I'm going to try anyway. And as soon as you say, I'm going to try anyway, you're talking about right view. You're not talking about perfect vision. So perfect vision is the experience, the unmediated experience. Right view are the words that you use to try and talk about them. So you've probably come across the image of the finger pointing to the moon. So right view is the finger, and it's pointing to the moon, which is perfect vision. And they are of a completely different nature. The finger is of a completely different nature to the moon. There's 250,000 miles between them, for example. But just their very nature is completely different. So any conceptual teaching is the finger that's trying to point us to the moon. It's not the end in itself, it's not the final truth. Yeah? So the Heart Sutra is saying here, don't forget all this stuff, all of these lists. These are fingers pointing to the moon, and they are empty of what? The concepts are empty of the experience that they're trying to communicate. All concepts are like a kind of net, if you like. They're a net with very big holes, and they can't capture the experience that they're trying to communicate. And this is true of anything. You try and describe how you're feeling at this very moment. And, maybe it's okay, or maybe it's a bit baffled or bored, or, whatever it is. You can come up with a few words, but it doesn't actually describe the entirety of your experience in this very moment. Words cannot capture experience. It's a very, very coarse net. So here, Avalokitesvara is applying it to Buddhist doctrine. It's more helpful for where we're at to apply it to a whole load of other concepts before we start applying it to the Dharma. It's much more useful to apply this understanding to the stories that we tell ourselves, the understandings that we have of our life, the views we have about ourselves, the views we have about other people, the views that we have about the world. So these are all the stories that we weave together to sort of make our way through the world. We've been accumulating them all of our life. People have been telling us what we're like. People have been telling us about what the world's like. Some of these stories are vaguely helpful. Some of them might be very helpful. You might have got some very good stories, some very good views from people. You might have got some really, really rubbish stories. You might have been told throughout your life that you're really rubbish and you'll never amount to anything. You might have been told that the world's a dangerous, scary place and you shouldn't trust anyone. So there's a whole load of stories, some of them helpful, some of them unhelpful, and all of them are shunya. All of them are empty of any ultimate nature. They're just more or less helpful. More or less helpful. You've got to decide how helpful they are. But we've got to realise that all of them are only ever going to be a very, very rough approximation, a very coarse net to experience. So as I say, I think that's, as it were, the most helpful application of shunyata as applied to thoughts and concepts. It's the stories that we tell ourselves. Avalokiteshvara is a bit beyond that. So what he did was he applied it to the Dharma. He applied it to all of these very helpful right views. And he's reminding us that these are all fingers pointing to the moon. So why is this important? So let's just look briefly. Oh, it may not be that brief, actually, you know me. Let's just look at why that might be helpful. I've thought of three ways that we might apply this, that we might find this helpful as applied to the Dharma. First one, it's about literalism. It's guiding us away from being over-literalistic. Now, Bhante was very keen on us not being literalistic. When I was a Mitra and I was doing Mitra study, I must have driven my poor study leader a bit potty because I was just in constant argumentation mode. I was always trying to pick holes in whatever it was that I was reading. I was, well, if that, then that, and if A then B, and A and B are contradictory, so that can't be right. And I'll be doing this all the time. Poor fellow. The teachings, the practices are there to liberate us. They're there to liberate us. Their fingers pointing to the moon. All of the Dharma has got the taste of freedom. So what we're trying to do, we're trying to sniff out the taste of freedom in any particular view. That's where we're going with it. If any particular teaching or any particular practice doesn't smell, taste of freedom, we've got something wrong. We've got something wrong. And it could be that we just leave that teaching aside for the moment. It's just probably not right for us right at the moment. But the Dharma is not a coherent philosophy. The teaching is not a coherent philosophy. The Buddha wasn't a philosopher. Any conceptual system that you can put together will have internal consistencies. There'll always be internal paradoxes within any conceptual system. I think someone's proven this. So we're not looking for complete internal consistency. We're trying to find out how any particular teaching helps free us. This is the point of it. So Sangharakshita was very keen on communicating through the language of myth, for example. Myth and symbol and image and story and poetry. Because it's much easier to hold that loosely, isn't it? Rather than kind of doctrinal lists. Some of you may have come across the teaching from Subhuti on the 3 myths of the spiritual life, which is it's like these 3 myths of the spiritual life, which I won't go into. You come up with all sorts of internal contradictions between them, but because we can think of them as myths, it's like that's okay. You don't expect myths to be all logical and coherent, do you? They're just what they are. So if we can think of all of the teachings as like myths, even if they present themselves as a doctrinal formula. Remember, all doctrinal formula are just posh myths. They're just posh metaphors. Don't take them too literally. This is what it's trying to say. Okay, so that's literalism. Very closely related is dogmatism. So it's really important to know your Dharma. It's really important to be clear about your Dharma. Learn the lists off by heart, I recommend it. Don't be afraid of criticising expressions of the Dharma that you think are false. You know, people can put forward the Dharma in ways that you think is missing something. Don't be afraid of getting into conversation about that. Bhante was very keen on being very clear about the Dharma, and he wasn't afraid to argue. And at the same time, all of our understandings are provisional. Because none of this is set in stone. There's no great tablets of stone that we have to adhere to. We're looking to get to an understanding of the spirit of the Dharma, rather than trying to sort of follow some formula exactly. Yeah. So if we remember that all of these teachings are fingers pointing to the moon of freedom, the moon of awakening, does this particular finger that you're looking at, does it point in the right direction? That's the question. I remember being on a retreat, and a study retreat, and someone came up with the idea of, we're not understanding, we're wonderstanding. We're wonderstanding. I really like that. It's like we retain the element of wonder, we retain the element of openness in relationship to our understanding. We don't ever feel we've arrived at the end of a particular understanding. We remain open and curious and in wonder about it. All of the teachings are open-ended. They don't end in some point. In fact, they're all open-ended. They all end, so to speak, in the blue sky. Okay, better hurry up, haven't I? Okay, over-conceptuality. This is the third one. So I've mentioned stories. If we're not careful, we live our lives in story. We live our lives in our mind. We're just living through our life in the story of our mind, through the stories that we weave ourselves. And I know for myself, this is especially the case when things aren't going well. You know, I'm experiencing dukkha, and my first place to go is the mind trying to work out what's wrong. It's like strategizing. The first strategy is, okay, let's work this out. What am I doing wrong? And it's a good thing to reflect on our life. That's a good thing. But what can happen so easily is that just becomes the end point. We just chase our tail around and round and round and round. In my case, it's, oh, I'm thinking so much. How do I stop thinking so much? Oh, I must find a way of stop thinking so much. Blah, 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 blah. So Avalokiteshvara is telling us that all of this thinking, in emptiness, it just subsides. Emptiness does not partake in conceptualization in this kind of way. Don't try and solve thinking with thinking. Don't try and live your life through thinking. At some stage, we have to let it all go. Thinking is just one part of our nature. And the Heart Sutra is directing us towards direct experience, towards sinking into our actual experience below the level of thought. And the same thing goes with the way that we reflect on the Dharma. It's really good to reflect on the Dharma, very important. But if you're not careful, well, I mean, just right now, here we are. I started this talk, whenever it was, too long ago. And it's sort of coming towards the end. So we could say, okay, impermanence. Even the sound of me speaking, impermanence. The sound of the wind, impermanence. So we can reflect on impermanence by just sticking the word impermanence on everything that we experience. We just sort of cover our experience with a concept, impermanence. At some stage we have to drop the idea and just experience what it's like for everything to be flowing. So we go below the level of thinking. At some stage we have to go below the level of thinking and drop into our actual experience of it. I've got an example I used before, which is of doing the washing up. So when you do the washing up, you've got all these dirty, oily, mucky plates, yeah? And you put them in a bowl of hot water with detergent. And then you give them a good scrub. But if you're not careful, if you just take them straight out, they're still covered in dirty, sudsy water, aren't they? So then you rinse them under the tap. So the detergent is a bit like right view. And the practice we do, it's a bit like scrubbing. So we're sort of scrubbing away with right view. But at some stage, we have to rinse off the dirty water. And it's the shunyata. It's shunyata that rinses off the dirty water. Yeah. So it's possible to do our practice just adding more and more detergent. Just keep squirting detergent in the sink, and you know what it's like trying to wash up with water that's got too much detergent on, and try and rinse it off, but this just makes the rinse water soapy, and everything's just covered in soap. That's what it's like when you're just too bound up with conceptuality or thinking. It's also possible for some people, they're a bit sort of dismissive of all the teachings, a bit dismissive of learning the practices. It's all shunyata anyway, isn't it? So what's the point? That's a bit like trying to take a really mucky plate and wash it under cold water. You sort of think you've done the job, but it's still all mucky and greasy if you notice. You're just sort of wallowing around in your own delusion that way. So these are two ways we can go wrong. We can have too much conceptuality and too little in a way. Okay, so let's wrap up. We better wrap up by actually hearing a bit more of the sutra, haven't we? Can we have verse 9, please?
Not even wisdom to attain, attainment too is emptiness.
Yeah. There's another whole thing I'd say about that, which I won't. That's a really important verse to hear at some point in our practice. For most of us, now is not the time. Okay, let's have verse 10.
So know that the Bodhisattva, holding to nothing whatever, but dwelling in pranya wisdom, is free of delusive hindrance, rid of the fear bred by it, and reaches clearest nirvana.
So this is what it's pointing to. This is the whole point of it. Holding to nothing whatever. Holding to nothing whatever. Letting go of attachment to everything, including the Dharma, at the right time, in the right way. So letting go of all vestiges of clinging. Then we are freed of delusive hindrance and rid of the fear that comes from it, rid of the fear bred by it, and reaches clearest nirvana. So this is pointing to the freedom of the blue sky, the complete freedom of not being walled in by our own ideas. Sangharakshita says the only way you can get to reality is by destroying your ideas about reality. It's a bit like getting to know someone. The only way you can get to know someone is by dropping your ideas, dropping your prejudices about them. Okay, let's have verse 11, please.
All Buddhas are past and present, Buddhas of future time, using this pranya wisdom, come to full and perfect vision.
So this is quite a statement, isn't it? This is saying that this isn't an optional extra. If you want to get awakened, this isn't an optional extra. This is the portal through which all Buddhas have passed, through dropping, letting go of everything, letting go of all holding, even to the subtlest concepts. And verse 12, please.
Hear then the great Dharani, the radiant peerless mantra, the pranya paramitar, whose words allay all pain, Hear and believe its truth.
Right, Dharani means, it's something like a mantra. It's similar to a mantra, but it's got a bit more of a almost magical quality to it. So the mantra is the Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Swaha, about which I won't say anything other than it is, no, I will say a bit. Gate means gone. So it means gone, gone, really gone, completely gone. Bodhi, awakening, hooray! That's what it means, something like that. And it is, so this, I've said it without due respect there really, but this is the unequalled mantra of Prajna Paramita. And Prajna Paramita at this point has turned into a figure, turned into the figure that we see on the shrine. We've got these four images of Prajna Paramita, the goddess of the perfection of wisdom, who I suspect Maitri Siddhi will be introducing tonight, will she? Okay, I won't say anything about her then. Very good. Good. So what I shall do is finish with the invocation to Prajna Paramita, and then I'll just throw out just a few questions that might be of interest to you. I'm not expecting you to join in with this, by the way, this is for my sake. Om Namo Bhagavati Arya Prajna Paramitai. Om Namo Bhagavati Arya Prajna Paramitai. Om Namo Bhagavati Arya Prajna Paramitai. So we have a few questions this afternoon. Well, we have groups this afternoon. And I just thought I'd throw out a few questions. Your group lead will have these. But these are just to give you a head start, maybe. You'll probably talk about whatever you want to talk about. Which is fine. That is completely fine. So you don't have to write these down. In which conditions, in which situations do you tend to feel most open and free? And if you wish, least open and free? Which stories, this is number 2, which stories of yourself, stories about the world, tend to wall you in the most? Do you have an example of where unrealistic expectations about something or someone led to disappointment? And can you sense what the story was behind that expectation? And what's your relationship to learning about Dharma teachings? If there's a spectrum between being a bit kind of dismissive of them and being too attached to them, do you have a sense of where you are in that spectrum? Good, thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you.